Testing, testing. I know Farsight is already here, so he can be my sound check guy as usual. All right. So, welcome everybody to CanHammer TV. It is lots of quarantine time, and so I thought it's a nice time to switch things around a little bit. Shout out on the stream already to C Farsight and Bruce Gordon and the Fishy Fish. Welcome, guys. Thank you for joining. Shout out to Dan at Red Dragon, our main sponsor and our main man. It is his birthday today, so everybody can wish Dan at Red Dragon a happy birthday. And he's greeted on his birthday with good news. The North American web store is opening soon, and things seem to be coming out of GW now, starting to go. We've got leaks this week of all the new AdMech models, and probably going to get rules in the next couple of days, and then the book will probably go on pre-order this Saturday for release next weekend. So it looks like the release train is slowly leaving the station, and we're going to start to get back into business soon. So that's great news, which means the Custodes book should be 3 to 4 weeks behind that, unless they decide to ramp forward or ramp faster their release schedule. We've been debating this on the Discord, and I don't feel like there's any real particular reason for them to do that, but if they do, then that's all the better for us. Especially now that there's not really any events or anything anyway, so there's no real big rush to release everything. It's already past the fiscal year, I believe, so no big deal. So we'll see, but I think the AdMech book is out next weekend, and then we will be after that, which is great news. Before we carry on, just shout out to everybody in the Discord channel. If you want to join the CanHammer Discord, do join right there. That link has been updated. And come join possibly one of the coolest Custodes communities on the internet. And do check out our channel here and on YouTube, where we have probably the most competitive Custodes content on the internet. So, and if you're watching this, you're probably in the right place. You found it. So tonight we'll be doing Custodes Tactica episode 17, which is the bike episode. So actually, a couple weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we had a vote on the Discord channel. What do you guys want to see on the next, 2 or 3 Tacticas? And the episode last week we did on Tanglefoot narrowly beat out the second highest votes, which was actually on Dreadnoughts and that stuff, which we did. Tanglefoot came in second to Dreadnoughts and stuff, which we did 2 weeks ago. And then in a close third was an episode to revisit bikes. So we will be talking about bikes tonight, which is cool. We'll have a little on the table session, and we'll just talk everything else about bikes. Javis123111, live streaming Warhammer. We definitely are. So welcome. And before we get started on that, just update. People let me know what you're working on in the hobby. As I said, I made a little change to the streaming setup. This is the side I normally stand on for the games, for the battle reports. I'm on the bottom side of the screen, which is where all my models are and the shelving. And then my opponent is usually at the window on the other side, which is actually where I usually do the live streams chats, so where you can see like the banner and stuff that I stole from Adepticon, all that sort of thing. But I decided to change it around for something new, and because I was bored and had nothing else to do, and so I'm streaming from the other side now, and so you can see my models behind me. This is just my random paint stuff, and I've got like my guard tanks and stuff up there, some Death Watch and AdMech, the G-Man right there. There's my the boats from the I can't remember what they're called now, the AOS Fish Army. Anyway, and then just see some random stuff there. And here behind me is my Custodes. So here's all my kind of foot bikes and dreadnoughts. And then up here you can see my Ares, and my grav tanks are all up there. So this is my little Custodes section. And I've got this cool little picture artwork of the Custodes from the Codex. And that's been printed on a piece of metal, like aluminum, so it's kind of cool. So that's where it is. So yeah, so I thought that we'd switch things up a little bit and make for a bit of change of scenery. So So we will be talking all about bikes tonight. Hobby-wise, I've been, be perfectly honest with you, I've just been playing a lot of Final Fantasy VII. I think I'm up to almost 35 hours right now. The game is just so good. I'm a little bit invested in it. I spent a lot of time playing it, the first version when it came out, so I'm a little bit emotionally invested in this game, and it does not disappoint for people like me. There have been real nice moments, and the combat is actually quite deep and refreshing and satisfying, and the bosses are actually hard. I've died many times, and you can't just go around hammering buttons, so it's actually a super, super awesome game. So I have done a little bit of progress on my bikers. So just getting to the painting details part now. So here's a biker, and so I've just got my dude here, and I've been working on using the oil paints in order to make these highlights there. You can see these sort of gradient. It's not a great camera for this sort of thing. Anyway, so it's kind of gradiented, working on the knees there and the front of this front arm, and then doing just slight highlights, but not as bright on the other arm, which kind of trails behind. And then just painting in the gold detail, which I'm going to try and highlight using some NMM style. And then I got to do the staff. And then the poll earlier this week was what question to make the helmet and the shoulders, and I think white has won. So I think I'm going to do that. Anyway, so the slow project coming along very slowly, but it's looking pretty good. And so we'll keep doing that. And then, of course, I forget I got the rest of that army to paint. Lots of Harlequins, lots of Guardians. So, yeah. All right, and I'm probably going to paint some Shining Spears, too. So lots to do. And not enough time in the day. We have so much time nowadays, but still not enough time in the day. It's crazy how that works. Javis is saying you're working on Tau. Yeah, actually, I saw a picture of a cool Tau army that was white with that kind of yellowy brown that like stormtroopers have on some of their padding. So they kind of look like stormtroopers. So white with this yellowy brown pieces of armor, and they get them converted so that the gun arms were actually fists holding guns. And so I thought it looked really cool. So there we go. Nothing much to announce. As people know, CCBB has been canceled, and so we are really going to try and make CanHammer Team as good as possible. If people really want to know, the date currently for CanHammer Team is February 20th to the 21st. So not Valentine's Day, and a good 3 weeks after LVO. So we kind of and far enough away from things like Adepticon, so it should be good. Hopefully people can come, and we're going to try and make it even better than it always is to try and make up for the loss of CCBB this year. What can you do? The world does seem to be slowly inching back to normal, but people should stay safe still. I still see people going to supermarkets with like 5 different people, and it's like, come on, guys, we still gotta keep it safe. Otherwise, all this hardship for the last 6 weeks has been for nothing. So, gotta stick to it. Okay, so we are going to talk about bikes. Virtus Praetors, or as we like to just call them in the Custodes community, bikers. And here we go. So Virtus Praetors bikes, that's what we're going to talk about today. Before we talk too much about these guys, we will address the elephant in the room, which is the Agamatus custodian bikes. So those are the 4-jolt ones that are extra long, and with the twin Las Pulsar guns. And it might be very good. I really do like the gun, but at 120 points a pop, doesn't matter how good they are. It's just too many points. So that's all I'm going to say about those bikes. So we'll go back to our normal bikes. So Virtus Praetors. When Custodes first came out, it was quickly obvious, and the most obvious part of the codex, that these jet bikes were very good. They are, wound and toughness wise, the hardest things to kill in our codex. T6, 4 wounds, 2 up, 4 up. So literally the hardest thing to kill in our codex. And so immediately gravitated towards bikes. So the early days of Custodes was really a lot of bike spam. And these things were fast, 14 inches. They, at the time, they could fly through and over infantry and terrain in the movement and charge in all phases. And so they were very good. At the time, there was not a lot of armor around the game. This was before knights. There was just a lot, at the time, there was a lot of infantry. So Guard had a book, the early books were a lot of infantry. And so Hurricane Bolter on these guys hitting on 2. So auto hitting basically was really good. And so everything about them was really good at the time. And man, they were hard to kill. A unit of 6 or 7 bikes was really hard to kill. Could take a lot of punishment. The real threat to us at the time was things like Magnus, just smite spam, the Thousand Suns thing that still exists, and Eldar, Doom Jinx would really put a crimp in your day, and Tau was always still bad for us. But even against Tau, we had some play before they got their codex. But it is, back then they were very strong. 90 points a bike, that's with the Hurricane Bolter. I'm trying hard to think of a multi-model type of unit that is not a vehicle, like a tank, that is that expensive. I think it may be one of the most expensive non-vehicle multi-model units in the game, at a minimum of 270 points for 3 of them. And you could go up to 10 if you wanted to, which is crazy. But it was a lot of points, but they seemed like they were really worth it, because at that time, playing the Footless just did not seem good. Nobody really wanted to play that. It seemed like and at the time, Guardians and Alaris and Wardens were all very expensive. And so to try and fill out a battalion left you very little points for anything else. And so it was really about bike spam. And so the most extreme bike spam, like the kind that I sort of played at many tournaments back then. In fact, the very first time I played Jim Vessel was with a bike spam list at the tournament up in Sudbury in the fourth round. And and he hit me with Death Hex and that crazy Bloodthirster with the Mortals, and he wiped me out. But anyway, that was also a tournament I played against triple those stupid Necron floaty tomb things that spit out all the Mortals. Anyway, but that was I was playing a lot of that, and that was basically like 18 bikes, 2 bike captains, and a loyal 32 and a Vexilla. That was basically the list. So if you wanted to go back to old school bike spam, then that's what you're talking. I think if you're going to spam bikes, you might as well spam bikes. And so we're talking like 18 bikes, a couple of biker captains, and the Vexilla. The Vexilla helped protect you on the first turn, and this was well before prepared positions, remember? It helped you protect you on the first turn, and then became a little bit of a placeholder, because your bikes, in order for the list to work, you had to play it pretty aggressively, and so you would rapidly leave your Vexilla behind. So that was basically it. You just play as many bikes as possible. You have a couple of large units, and then maybe one smaller kind of suicide or deep striking unit, and then you just play it that way. And it was a very hyper aggressive way of playing Custodes, and you maybe 50-50, like you won half the time just because people couldn't deal with such a 2,000 points of bikers coming right at them, and some armies could deal with it, and then you lost. And it was a very binary sort of thing. You just went hard, and that was it. We have not seen those lists for some time now. First of all, everything else on our codex started to come down in points and get more value for points. Whereas the bikers have never been great value for points, but they were the only thing that were even close to value because everything else was so expensive. But as everything else started to come down in points, their base troopers came down so you could start running battalions, then it fell out of favor to start running Custodes bikes. For a long time, people thought the Codex jet bike was actually quite threatening, and stooping dives and all these things, and these things hit pretty hard. So that was one factor that caused the start of the downfall of the bike list. Secondly, we started to get codexes that could handle us or that we could not handle as well. So we started seeing things like triple super heavies, like guard super heavies. Then knights came out, and knights became very difficult for us to manage, relying on charging in order to get the reroll wounds and getting lucky on 5s to wound and D3 damages. So it became hard to manage knights. And then, those two were the main things, Castellan. And then, so you started to see a lot of lists and other factions getting books that could easily or more easily take down a unit of bikes. And so then they started to drop a little bit more from that. So there's a combination of other things becoming more viable and less points intensive, different ways to play, mission changes, as well as other books getting better. And that's been the story of Custodes since we came out. Other than the Forge World stuff and the brief dalliance with Supremacy in the form of the overpowered Caladius, mostly Custodes has been a static book, especially the Codex, and everything else in the meta has changed around it, and we have just had to try and adapt to that without any real changes. So that's kind of what happened to the bike. And then the final nail in the coffin for the bike list was the nerf to fly. So of course, I think it was after Adepticon or LVO like 2 years ago, they decided that Smash Captains having a free charge basically down like that was not how they wanted fly to work. So they completely nerfed it. If you remember that, you were not allowed to use fly anymore basically to go over anything on charging. And so that was a big loss for the jet bikes, because now we had to go around everything and around models too. Now later on they relaxed that nerf so that you can still fly over models in the charge phase but not buildings, and that's how it is now, which is still bad for the bikes. As many of you know, if you've been following the channel for a while, there was a period of time where I was playing a bike unit in my list. I played a list of a hybrid list of tanks, and then a Aquilon bomb and a 5-man biker bomb with the usual characters. And I liked that for a period of time. It was effective. And at that time, I was using bikes as a more like a suicide unit. So they would be hyper aggressive or semi-aggressive, where the rest of my army would stay back. They would take things with them as they went down and usually die by turn 2, turn 3. Maybe the odd lucky remaining surviving bike would go on to do a little bit of harassment for turn 3, turn 4. Rarely would they survive the whole game, and that would be my 450 point unit eventually gone. But hopefully taking, a knight with them or something big, or just causing havoc while the rest of my army kind of sits at the back. That probably wasn't the best way to play them. 450 points, that's a quarter of your army, just like suicided away. And so probably it would have been better to play them less aggressively. But you know what? When your things move 14 inches and can hit pretty hard, it's really hard to play them non-aggressively. But that's what you got to do. And we're going to talk about that when we go on to the tabletop. In terms of loadouts, so people asked me to visit this question. So I think you're still going Hurricanes. It's compelling to think about the salvo launchers because they got cheaper. So it's only 5 points more per model to get the salvo launcher, and so you basically have a roving Melta. The worst part about the salvo launcher is the heavy. The Melta itself is not a great weapon. You don't see a lot of Meltas in the meta because D6 damage is just kind of sucky. And Strength 8, while good, still only wounds vehicles on 3s, wounds T8 on 4s, and then this doesn't even have the Melta rule. It just rerolls wounds against vehicles. So, and then you're rolling D6. And then the big nail in the coffin really for the salvo is that it's heavy, so you're -1 to hit. So hitting on 3s, maybe with a reroll around, you got 5 guys, maybe you hit like 2-3 times, and then you wound like 1 or 2 times, and then maybe you get 1 through on an invuln, and then you roll like a 1 or 2. That's really, really underwhelming. And so I think even for the five points extra, it's too much already on a 90-point model. But is worth considering maybe on like a shield captain, which is what some people have been doing, giving their shield captain salvo launchers and keeping their bikes as hurricanes. And as the meta develops and we start seeing more Gaunts and Tyranids and Genestealer Cult and Guard coming back and things like that, and Sisters that are still T3 and 3-up armor save, I think the Hurricanes is still a better meta decision right now. We need other things to kill tanks and things. We cannot rely on salvo launchers to do that for us. So I think just ramming salvo launchers on them is not a good idea. I think Hurricane bolters are still better, especially combined with the mobility. You can often pick off like a guard character with like 24 Hurricane bolter shots. Like you can really do some sniping with them like that. So I think Hurricane bolters are still the better loadout for them. Now, somebody asked me about their bases. So, the bikers come with two size bases in the box itself. You can get this kind of biker oval, okay? And then the other size base is like a Venom circular base, okay? And I have always told people to go the oval base because you have more flexibility about how you place your models if your base is not a circle. If your base is a circle, then it doesn't matter which way you face your models is completely irrelevant. And that's fine, and no big deal. Also makes it a bit of a pain in the butt to fit on like runes, for example, or pieces of terrain that are narrower, with the circle thing, and it's generally more of a pain in the butt just to play with. And then also, if you have the oval bases, you can just have so much more flexibility about how you place things. So instead of being like this far apart with two circles, you can place them closer. Makes them easier to hide, okay? You can take up more space. You have the option of taking up more space with a 2-inch coherency like this, or you can take up less space with a 2-inch coherency like that. So you have more play and options with this irregular shape than with a circle. Certainly it helps when you're trying to do things like trapping, or if you're trying to do shenanigans with polens and movements and things, or if you're just trying to stay in that Vexilla aura or reroll aura. This long base can come in handy to stay in those auras, whereas a circle doesn't really matter. So it just gives a good player who's savvy with their movement a little bit of that extra flexibility when you have that oval base versus a circle base. So I would always suggest people use the oval bases than the circle bases. Also, the oval bases are textured. I mean, these are special oval bases, but the normal ones are just like normal black bases, so you can do stuff to them, whereas the circle bases are those see-through like Venom bases, which I don't personally like. So they're just cooler. So I would definitely suggest using the oval bases, not the circle bases. Okay, so we talked about a basic kind of bike spam list. We talked about use of things like salvo launchers. We talked about the bases. We talked about a bunch of those things. So let me just, sorry, the chat is frozen, so I'm just going to reload it here. If people have questions, obviously, then do feel free to ask at any time in the chat, as usual. Okay. Stooping dive. Okay, well, let's talk about how to move the bikes first. So I won't talk about how to play a bike spam list. It's fairly straightforward. I think you just have to be pretty hyper aggressive. And nowadays with ITC, especially if you know you're going first, you can just deploy on the line and plan to be hyper aggressive. I just think that is a much worse way to play now than it used to be, because if you crash into your opponent in the first turn and you don't do very much, which is a likely possibility these days, you're just going to get so wasted and then the game is over. So not many armies are designed to play like that, and I don't think bike spam is, to be honest. I think you'd be better off playing more conservatively and biding your time. In terms of how to use like a single unit of bikes, People have asked me this many times before. What's the minimum number of bikes? I think if you're playing a unit of bikes as a hammer unit, then I think you have to play a minimum of 5. So I think 5 is the minimum. 4 is too few. Nowadays, it's easy to kill 4 bikers. 3 is definitely too few for a hammer unit. You're not hitting hard enough. 5 is the minimum. And then, I would say 7, 5 to 7 if you really want to run a lot of bikes. Once you get into 6 and 7, now you're flirting with losing a bike to morale or having to spend 2 CP. And I got to tell you, losing a 95-point model to morale is feel bad. So you got to really think about going over 6 or 7. And if you need such a large hammer unit, then maybe you should think about using something else. But so I would say 5 to 7 is the unit size you want to use for a hammer unit. If you just want a small unit of bikes, like a 3-man unit to harass or maybe drop in the backfield and do shenanigans like that, maybe you should use something else, because 270 points just for that is a lot of points. I would actually consider using Venatari in that role. Instead, you get more models, more wounds, not quite as tough, but auto deep strike and can still move 12 inches and infantry, so not restricted by the bike movement issue, which we're going to talk about in a second. So I would actually, if you want a scout or harassment unit or backfield dropping mobile unit, then I would not use a unit of 3 or 4 bikes. I would actually use Venatari. Of course, if you can't play Forge World, then you just use bikes, but because it's the only thing that moves more than 6 inches in our codex. So let's talk about a 5-man bike unit. Okay, I'm just gonna pull up the overhead here. Okay, so here's a little cut of my overhead table. So this is a typical kind of setup for an ITC table. So you have a rune here facing another rune. In almost any configuration is going to be like that, and they are 18 inches apart. At the closest they will ever be is 18 inches apart, okay? And so typically your opponent will set up some stuff in the rune. You've got a unit of guardsmen here on the first floor of the rune, okay? And then I will often set up my bikes as a screening unit, okay? So they go in the bottom of the rune right next to the wall like that. If it is very important for your bikes not to be hit, and the opponent has the ability to hit them on the first turn, then don't set them up like that. Don't use them as a screen, use guardians or whatever. But otherwise, I like to use them as a screen, and then because they're quite tough, and then also they're as far forward as they can be, okay? So Sean Striker, Terminators are good for deep striking in the backfield, but then you're running them in, and then once they deep strike you, especially if they're out of position, they only move 6, and so I think actually Venatari being 12-inch move better serves that kind of harassment role. Okay, so you've got this, you got this unit of bikers set up as your screen here on the front, and then they've got all the protection from the Vexel and all that stuff, and they'll only be shot by out of line of sight shooting, and there's not a lot of that in the game right now that can kill bikes, so they're still pretty safe there. And then so in your first turn, then you're probably not doing anything, okay? Because what you used to do is be like super aggressive, okay? So you can shoot your bike unit forward 14 inches. Now you're a 4-inch charge away from the front line, okay? So that's what you used to do. And if you got first turn, of course it wasn't a sure thing back then, but you say, okay, see you later, rest of my army. I'm going to use this 5-man bikers and tie your stuff up for like 2-3 turns while the rest of my army moves up. And like you can't just ignore 5 bikers coming at you, even now. But now these guys can't charge anything, okay? Because of the rule that they cannot go through terrain. First of all, they're not infantry, so they can't go through the rune, and they can't fly over it like we used to do. You make a 9-inch charge and you're in the rune by flying over it. You cannot do that anymore, so that really screws the bike up. So then what are you going to do? You're going to move up here and then just wait and get shot to hell? You can advance. Since you're not charging anything, you could advance and get way up to here. And then what's going to happen? You're just going to get shot and countercharged. So you can't play bikes like that anymore because of your inability to interact with runes and to charge over terrain. And that is a big problem for the bikes and why they're just not that good anymore. And it also slows you down a turn. Okay, because you can't do that. you have to bide your time and then wait, or bide your time and move up in the cover of something else, or fly around the side and try and hit and wrap things as you go. So you can't just shoot forward anymore because you're so much more likely to die now than you used to be, and you're delayed by a turn. Okay, if you can make this gap and charge in, no problem. But if you can't, you're just delayed by a turn. And the next turn even, you know, you have to move and then you have to go around the stupid thing or charge around the rune, and it becomes real burdensome. And so what I found eventually playing that 5-man bike unit over and over and over again was that unless my opponent was over aggressive, which good opponents tend not to be, and then I can wrap things with my bikes, the bikes weren't as fast as they would seem because they would get delayed by a turn by not being able to go through ruins and having to go around ruins. Okay, now, you know, if you don't die for whatever reason, okay, then the next turn you're landing in his back line, okay, and then it's a field day. But if somebody lets you do that, then you're gonna win anyway. Doesn't matter how you play. So so that's the problem with the bike unit right now, is the fly nerf on the charge really kind of screwed it up for them. Now, if your opponent, okay, if they make the first move, let's say, and they want to get on the middle objective, let's put our bikes, you know, back in the rune here, okay, and it's like turn 2 and your opponent's starting to get a bit antsy, and they're like, start moving towards this objective. Let's try and cap this, you know, let's try and cap this bonus here. You know, let's try and cap this bonus here. So now I think it's very reasonable, turn 2, to shoot your bikes forward, okay? And probably send the shield captain with them for rerolls, okay? And then so now what you do is you shoot other things, okay? So multiple guard units, you just mow down a whole bunch of chaff, and then you try and end up, you know, with a wrap on one of these guys, okay? And remember, in the charge phase, you can charge over models, so that helps you get into good wrapping position. So I think that's how, and then this becomes a very difficult unit to deal with. Now, keep in mind, one of the big problems with bikers is strength 6. And for dealing with tougher units, it's all fine on the charge and you get to reroll your wound, but when they get stuck in combat or you don't want to come out of combat, then they lose a lot of efficacy wounding those things on 5s without any rerolls. So keep that in mind. That's the downside of their lance weapon. But if you can get the charge, it would be very good. Okay, so that's how I see bikes these days. The other thing you could do, as I mentioned, so let's say, you know, well, we won't talk about it because I suggested that you don't do that. But so I think, you know, 5-man bike unit is pretty good for this kind of harassment. And so just to show you now on the table, you know, a 5-man bike unit with oval bases can be this tight, okay, or it can be that wide, cover half the table, okay? One unit of bikes. So you see the much better to use the oval bases, because that gives you that extra length if you need it. Not very infrequently do you end up in combat like this, okay, with like a unit of dudes, and your buff character, you outcharged them, you left them behind, so you leave one person there, okay? But because of the length of your base, you're still in 6 inches, but you're within an inch of a guy who's in combat because of the long bases. And so you can actually strike someone from combat from way back here. This dude, even though he's way back here and the combat line is up here, because of these obnoxious bases. So definitely better to have the oval bases. I thought I'd just show you that on the tabletop. Okay. All right, let's go back to the thingy-majiggy. Oop, wrong one. Okay, so it's just a quick illustration on the tabletop there of how I think people should be using bikes right now. As I say, I think that's probably the best unit, and I don't think you should suicide them anymore. The other question people ask me is, would you suicide a shield captain? If you asked me that like 6 months ago, I would still have said you could do that, although that is 160 points you're throwing away. But and he's very good at it, at harassing and staying alive. I mean, the number of times my shield captain has just survived a lot of stuff at the end of the game just to cap an objective or kill a character or something. But, you know, they don't hit as hard as people think. I mean, people used to think triple shield captain was really good. They were good for mobility. They don't actually hit that hard, especially if they're not charging. And anything with a good invuln can really dent the blows and still D3 damage. It's only 5 attacks, so... But a shield captain can still be a pretty good harassment or suicide unit if you really must use it like that. But generally, after all this time of playing bikes and shield captains on bikes, I would almost always, as usual, err on the cautious side. It's better to have your units alive later in the game to help you do stuff than to throw them away early for 1 or 2 points here and there. I just don't think it's worth it. It's not. Nothing is ever really good for us to trade with. So, you know, and your shield captain is not going to punch so far above its weight that it really trades with anything. I think a shield captain that's protected and able to reinforce, buff, and then strike things when it's protected is actually way more useful than a shield captain that you just throw away in a turn or two, hoping to kill something. So, as with anything that flies and moves very fast, you can always look out for opportunities to snipe characters, okay, by landing next to them. Just like when you play flyers, basic strategy with anything that flies and moves very fast is to use that ability to fly next to things, to gank them, and, you know, 60 Hurricane Bolter shots is going to kill most single targets, like character targets. There's almost no character targets there that you probably won't kill with that many auto-hitting Hurricane Bolters, even with no AP. So keep that in mind. You know, librarians, company commanders, any guard character, you know, Space Marine characters even, because they're just 3-up save, right? You know, T4. There's a lot of bolters to kill stuff like that. The other things I've learned from experience, shooting chaff that's T4 is much worse than shooting chaff that's T3. So keep that in mind. If you think a 5-man biker unit is going to wipe out a whole bunch of boys, you'll probably be disappointed. But it will wipe out a whole bunch of gaunts or guardsmen or things like that. So you're welcome to split fire if you feel, you know, do the math in your head, but the math is way better on T3 than on T4. So keep that in mind. I don't even know if you can consider T4 things chaff, to be honest, but okay. All right, if people got questions, please put them in chat. I'm just going to check my... Okay. Also, you know, people let me know if they've had good experiences playing bikes or if they've had bad experiences playing bikes. Let me know in the chat and we can talk about it, or maybe some things you could have done to change that experience a little bit. So Sean Stryker, of course, is always, as my old French teacher used to say, like a Panasonic, slightly ahead of his time. The next thing I want to talk about that he's already asked me is, how could bikes get good again? So thank you, Sean, for being just like a Panasonic. So with our book coming out, maybe in the next month, a month to 6 weeks, getting excited. And what could we see that would make bikes better? Okay, that's a great question. Will bikes get cheaper? I don't think they will. I mean, we have gone through 2 chapter approved and Forge World corrections and 2 or 3 chapter approved, 2, and the bikes have not budged a single point. And so I really don't think that the bikes are going to get any cheaper. I think GW really puts a monetary value on 2+ armor and a monetary value on 4+ invuln and a monetary value on 14-inch movement. And so those things all combined make these guys 90 points. So yeah. Bruce Gordon brought up a good point, 5+ Overwatch. So I think this is a prime unit to use 5+ Overwatch stratagem on, but you really got to do the math on how effective that's still going to be based on what is charging you. If you're getting charged by a bunch of Drukhari witches, go for it, right? Go for it. You're gonna like wipe a whole bunch of them, and often that's a gotcha moment because people don't know Custodes have that stratagem. If you're getting charged by boys, as I said before, that's way less effective. And if you kill 5 boys on the charge, that was probably a waste of CP. So you got to really think, and anything greater than T4, that's almost certainly a waste of CP. So even with all the bolter shots and the 5-up Overwatch, you're still looking at just shooting T3 stuff, in my experience. It's a waste of CP sometimes. Oh yeah, so before we talk about Psychic Awakening, we're going to talk about Stooping Dive. Okay, so Stooping Dive is a stratagem that lets bikers, so not just bikers but also shield captains on bikes, but units of bikers, to declare a charge at the end of your opponent's charge phase and then charge something if you make the charge, and then they get to strike first. So this is a great ability, 3 CP. For the first 6 months this book came out, everybody was caught off guard by Stooping Charge, and it was a real gotcha, feel bad moment. But hey, whatever. Now nobody really falls for it. Plus, nobody really plays bikes anymore. But so maybe if bikes started coming back, people would start falling for it again. But still, 3 CP. If you have 3 CP set aside for a homer, your army has 8 to 9 CP. That's a big investment, and you can only one of those with the moment shackle. So it's a big investment of CP. You got to really think, what is the impact of this Stooping Dive? First of all, don't do it if it's a Stooping Dive of more than like 6 inches. Okay, 7, you're starting to hedge your bets. 8 up, I would not Stooping Dive because the chances are too high that you just wasted 3 CP and done nothing. Okay, I think like 6 and under is like the farthest I would want to risk a Stooping Dive. And remember, you don't have to, like, okay, so you got some guardians here and your opponent just charged you, you don't have to be just here to Stooping Dive into what just got charged. You can Stooping Dive anything, anywhere on the field, anywhere on the pitch of battle. Okay, if your bikes are way up at the top and they're 6 inches from a unit that you really wanted to charge last turn or whatever, or they didn't get it or they failed to charge, you can Stooping Dive. Okay, you don't have to be charging what the person has charged into you. Okay, everyone thought that you have to charge only into like where the action is, but you can charge anywhere. Same with Heroic Intervention. You don't have to be right where the action is. You can Heroic Intervene anywhere. So keep that in mind. And of course, because it is a charge, you can go over models. It's a charge move, basically. It's just a normal charge move. You have to roll it, and so you can catch people off guard by skipping over screens and stuff like that. But really, I would not, like, you're risking 3 CP for good chance of failure at, like, you have to check the math on me, but like 7 up probably I wouldn't do it. And then assuming you make it in, you need to be able to make it in with enough bikers to make it worthwhile, okay? So you got to measure it out before you decide to declare it, okay? If I make this charge, how many people are going to be able to get? Keep in mind that you are allowed to pile in and consolidate, and because you charged, you can do that even if your opponent disappears. And then you need to be able to figure out how much am I going to do with this, okay? So a number of times I have Stooping Dived and then did nothing, or because I didn't pre-measure it or see where I could fit my bikes, I ended up only getting like 1 guy in, and that was just a total waste of 3 CP. And then now also your opponent might be able to hit your bikes too if they had things already stuck in combat. So you really have to think about how many attacks you're going to get in and what is the goal of your Stooping Dive, okay? One of the best Stooping Dives I ever did was against Dave Koska at CanHammer Team Tournament like 3 or 4 years ago. And he put up there was like a square rune in the middle of the table, and I moved my bikes up to the edge of the rune, but I stopped there and he couldn't shoot me because I was hiding. And he had some scouts on the other side on the center objective just sitting there. It wasn't an enclosed rune. And this was back in the day when we could still charge over runes. And so in his turn, he didn't do anything, and then I Stooping Dived. No. So he was going to charge me with a whole bunch of Electro Priests. That's right. And so he moved in, and he actually made a charge into another unit with Electro Priests. And then I stooping dived with a unit of bikes, got most of my guys in with with the charge, the 3-inch pile-in, to get more people in, and then killed all the electro priests, and then used 3-inch consolidate to now move 3 inches closer to his gun line. And so that whole sequence not only killed the electro priests before they got their stupid invulns up, which was great, saved my unit from getting hit because I hit first, which was great, but also gave me a 8-inch charge, 3-inch pile-in, 3-inch consolidate, so 14 inches of free movement, and then it was my turn. So they basically got to move twice. So if you that's another good use for stooping dive if it is very important for you to get your bikes forward like that, and they'll be able to kill what they're stooping diving so that they can do those movements forward. Well, you don't want to do a stooping dive and then get locked, and then you're kind of like screwed. Still, it's a lot of CP. Would you pay 3 CP to move again? Maybe. A lot of armies can do that for less than 3 CP. So, ask yourself that question if you're thinking of stooping diving. Will I be able to kill what I'm diving? Will I be saving? Will I accomplish anything? And if not, if I'm using it for movement, would I pay 3 CP to make that movement at this point in the game? Think of it that way. And potentially that's 12 plus 3 plus 3. Potentially that's 18 inches of movement, obviously, if you roll a 12-inch charge. But, potentially it's, 7. So think of it that way. All right, so that's my little treatise on stooping dive. All right, any questions, let me know. Let me know your stories. I want to know if people have made bad stoops. People have made game-winning stoops. Stoops can be very dramatic. So let me know. It's like with all our stratagems, it's really about how you use it for best effect. Okay. I think the last thing we talk about is my wish list for bikers. Okay, so this is 2 different questions. What do I think bikes are going to get, and what I hope they're going to get. Yeah, Sean, I'll give you a tour after this. So, I think they're not going to get much. I think they're going to get whatever army rules that we're going to get and sisters are going to get. And so hopefully these are things that make us tougher. Minus wound strat, -1 to wound rule or strat or aura, +1 save, strat or wound or aura, all the stuff that we've been talking about on the Discord and stuff, all our predictions. If we get some of those that affect the army, then probably they will affect bikes. Our rules have always affected infantry and bikes, and so I don't think that they would necessarily exclude bikes from these rules for now, although they could, obviously. So I think that it's possible that they get better by proxy because our army is getting better. I don't think they're going to make any specific strats for the bikes, but what I would like to see is some specific help for the bikes. As I said already, I don't think they're going to get any cheaper, but I would like to see some way of improving their mobility, because right now the ruin thing is messed them up. And because they're not infantry. So either an ability to move twice or advance in charge, fall back in charge, some of these movement shenanigans that almost every single book has now except for us. And I think if they got like a move in charge, like advance in charge or something, that would make them extremely strong. Because with the auto 6-inch advance, that's very strong. Fall back in charge, also super strong because if they can fall back 14 inches and then they can shoot because they're fly, and then another charge. And then if you can advance in charge and then fall back in charge, like those stratagems can combine. Well, then I think like bikes become very good. A unit of 5 guys like that is going to be really good. So hopefully we see some kind of movement stratagem probably. I think if they get anything, it's going to be like 1 stratagem that affects their movement, maybe for like 2 CP or something like that. So I think I'm hoping that's what we might see to give bikes a little bit of life. If it's just the army buffs, then it's probably worth revisiting them anyway. As I say, when your rules change, you should, and your points change, you should always revisit things. Just because if they get generally just tougher, then they become a little bit of a menace like they used to be. Although if they don't hit any harder, then they're still not quite as good. But bikers still hit pretty hard, especially with throwing out +1 banners these days. Avenge the Fallen on bikers is really good too. So I think that's kind of what we might see, and what I hope we see with the bikers in our Psychic Awakening. Yeah, I love to play bikes, and I'll show you my collection in a second, because I got a lot of them, and yeah. So I have a lot of hopes and dreams for the book. But it would be nice to get some of these bikes on the table again, because they're cool models, if not a little bit of a pain in the ass to play. Okay, so speaking of models, so how do you model the spear? Okay, so I'll keep one bike here for illustration. So the spear arm comes in different configurations if you assemble them properly. So one is like up, okay? One version of the arm is like that, kind of just forward, and then another version is kind of like that sort of thing, okay? Now this is, obnoxious because it's really tall, okay? Here's like a drinking glass. It's like taller than a drinking glass. It's like 3/4 the height of my head. Now, so some, obviously, raw, you can target people with their spear sticking up. Now, in all the games I've played with bikers in these years, since the release of this book, I've only ever had one opponent who insisted that they can target to the tip of the spear. And that's fine, because then I just said, oh, okay, well, this is supposed to be magnetized like that, actually. So, that's obviously way easier to hide, although not really in some circumstances. But, in some games, I've even just taken the spears off because the person was like, yeah, that's stupid. And then I just take the spears off because it's a pain in the ass. So you should always magnetize the spear arm. Always. Okay? And if you really want to be anal about it, make sure you put all the magnets on the same way so you can just interchange all the arms. I didn't do that, so some of my magnets don't fit on some of them and some of them fit on it's a pain in the ass. But just do them all the same direction so you can just put any arm on any model. And then it's fine. So magnetize for sure. But yeah, I've never had problems with the spear arms and line of sight, and yeah. But I mean, if you're in like the finals of LVO and somebody is within their right to enforce the raw on you, and you have to deal with it. Hey, Snoop DeVille. Okay. All right, so that's all I want to talk about tonight for bikes. People want a tour of my collection, I can do that right now, and please post questions. Let me move one of my lights here. All right, here we go. Welcome to my crib. Welcome to my crib. All right. So here's my collection. And I've got an Orion up there, but I didn't have space for it. But so I've got both super heavies, and so here's just my guys. So here's all my Guardians. As you can see, here's all my magnetized weapons and spear arms and axes and shields and stuff. And my Guardian numbers have grown from what they were before, but that's what you have to do. And then I've got 6 Alars at the back, fully painted. I've got 4 Alars on my painting table over there, and so I'll have 10 in total. Then there's my unit of 6 Aquilons, and then I've got my 10 Sagittarium at the back, and I've got Inquisitor Hector X sitting over there too. Then I've got my Valoris, which is just the limited edition Ixion Hail model, which I much prefer because he brings his own stairs. And then I've got a Biker Captain, which I know is the Biker Captain because he has no helmet, and I freehanded the his cape here, and I put, this is Samael's cape from Dark Angels, and I put that on there. So, you know, so just to stand him out as the shield captain, because if you were playing 18 bikes, it's really hard to remember which ones were the captains and which ones were the units. Then I've got my 18 bikes here. I've got all the bikers. I think it's 18, 17, yeah. And then, so what I ended up doing is just painting red stripes on some spears, silver stripes on other spears, and then some spears were just normal black. And so then that's how I told my 3 units apart when I was playing with that many bikes. Okay, then I got my 2 Vexillas. So I've got 1 Vexilla, and then my more recent sort of Warden conversion of the Vexilla, and they both have all weapon options magnetized. Then I've got 9 Wardens here, which are painted in this different black color because they're like the keepers of the jail. So they're the Shadow Keepers, sort of black. And then they got purple blades, whereas the Alaris axes here are blue blades. So that's kind of make them a little bit different. Then I've got my Aculus Dreadnought there. Boom, boom, boom. That was the first time I tried painting this kind of lightning detail. Come on, focus camera. And then I've got my Telemon back there, which is again Shadow Keeper's colors, and that was painted by Nick because he picked it up for me in England. I told him just keep it and paint it. And then I've got my neglected Venatari, 6 Venatari at the back there. All right, that's that picture printed on aluminum, which is really cool. Thanks to Raul and the boys at Dream Tea. All right, then I've got 2 Palace tanks. I only have 2. I never bought a 3rd one. So I have 2 Palace tanks, and these clear, I love the clear acrylic bases on these tanks because it really kind of just, you know, whatever, they're floaty. And then I've got my triple clay just at the back there, and I've got 2 Blaze turrets. All right, then I've got my Ares, which I just finished painting recently. There it is. Alright, and it kind of matches my Custodes tanks with the red stripe there and the black panels. So it all kind of matchy-matchy. And then the Orion is up there. I'm going to show you that one. And that's it. That's my whole army. Boom, boom, boom. How many troops do I have? I have a lot. I have like, I don't know, 20 Guardians, 10 Alaris now, 6 Aquilon, 20 Sagittarium, and 9 Wardens, a bunch of characters. 18 bikes, 2 Dreads, 6 Venatari, 3 Caladius, 2 Palace tanks, and both heavy flyers. So yeah, I got a lot of stuff. All right, that's my Custodes collection. That was kind of fun, actually. Thank you for asking me to do that. Okay, well, any more questions, guys? As I said, I do have a lot of stuff to give away, but I can't do that right now because of the post. And, there's no point posting something right now if it's not, blood or something for somebody. So I'll definitely be giving away a lot of stuff in the weeks coming up. Next week, we did cover the Venatari, Sean, back when we were doing unit reviews, so you can check that out for sure. I haven't done a more recent one, but kind of give you a little mini Venatari stuff today. So next week, we have a choice, and I'll put a poll up on the Discord. We can talk about Soup, and in Soup, we can talk about Assassins and Inquisitors. We can talk about Unleash the Lion and all the various shenanigans you can use and not use with Unleash the Lion stratagems. So do a little stratagem focus like we did for Tanglefoot. Or we can talk about ITC secondaries, how to pick them, which ones to pick, which are good, which are bad. And then we've also had a request for an episode on Sagittarium. I'm not sure I can fill a whole episode on Sagittarium at the moment, so maybe I'll wait for the book to come out and see if anything helps them along. But I did write that down. So I think mostly either Souping, Unleash the Lions, or ITC secondaries. We'll put a vote up, and we'll do that as the next episode. This was episode 17. So with the 2 interviews, that means next week is actually 20, but that's pretty cool. And I don't know if people noticed the ticker tape down there. Are those Virtus Predators or Murder Hornets? Everybody freaking out about these Murder Hornets right now. So, cool. Okay, well, thanks for joining me, everybody. I hope that was helpful, and I hope people have some fun with bikes. Right now, it's just about having fun, guys. You know, nobody's really playing tournaments, and you got these bikers, so just give them a go and have fun with them. And we will see you next week, so thanks for watching. Good night.